Hi, thank you for joining me today to learn about my adult program of early math literacy and number sense, ways to help your child succeed with math. The overall plan for this program is to bring in preschool parents and teach them about the stages of early math literacy and number sense, provide them with some tools to help them promote this development in their children at home, and give them a chance to see some of these things in action. So here is a schedule of what we will be covering in this session, and this is the same slide that I would have up for parents, and in fact this entire presentation is what I would use with the caregivers that come in for this program. So this would let them know that we will be learning about the different stages of math literacy and number sense, exploring ways for them to include math literacy at home to help their children develop these skills. We would go over the specific library materials and supports that we have available at my library for these caregivers to check out and use with their children. And then we would also do a quick story time with their children there to go over the components of math literacy that they could be doing at home. Now, for most of this presentation, it will be me or the other library staff member speaking with the parents and educating the parents. And that would not really be something that preschoolers or kindergartners would be interested in or really be good at paying attention to. So we would have an additional staff member present with the children in the back of the room, where the children would be able to do different independent-ish activities like coloring, little simple puzzles, just different things that we already have on hand from like our outreach department or other items from our children's department. That way the caregivers would be able to give their full attention to this presentation and not have to split their time between their child and the adults. So I wouldn't want to assume that anyone attending this presentation already has a solid understanding of early math literacy. So we would begin by going over some general milestone markers for different age ranges. So the first one would be from ages 0 to 12 months, where babies would begin to classify items in simple groups. And I would give some examples with that, like they might be able to classify things by like the color or whether it's like soft or not. And then we would also see that children in this age can understand some relative size words. And I would make sure to tell the caregivers that these are not hard and fast. These are just, and in general, this is what we typically see around this age. So continuing on from ages 1 to 2 years old, here are some of those general skills that children are able to do in terms of math literacy, just so that parents have an idea of like what age their child was around when they started seeing and being able to do these types of things. And I would, continue to remind caregivers that it's okay if they started some of these closer to 1 or closer to the 2-year age mark. It's completely fine. So since the program is geared for parents of preschoolers and kindergartners, this is where we would spend a little bit more time. That way parents could see what their child might be able to do now and what they might be able to develop here soon. So we would go over that this would include the counting up to 20, and that they would hopefully be able to point at objects and count them when they're in a grouping of 20 or less. And that they might start to understand around this age that a word like 6, S-I-X, represents the number numeral 6, and that they're the same thing. They may not be able to fully read those words yet, especially some of those harder to spell ones like 7, but they might start to recognize a relationship between the word and the numeral. Our spatial awareness would also be developing a lot more around this time. So that is part of why we would have puzzles available in the back of the room for some of the kids to try to work on, because that is a developmentally appropriate skill for this age range. And hopefully some of the caregivers would notice, oh yes, my child has started to sort things by a specific color or shape or size, just like is here on the screen. So a lot of the things here on this slide would probably be new or undiscovered at this point for the children and their caregivers, because most of them will probably not be kindergarten aged or 5 years old yet. But I wanted the parents and caregivers to be able to see where their child might be going next. And it might be that some of them notice, oh, my 4-year-old is able to do some of these things already, or they're very, very close to being able to do it. So some of these things are taken from our state standards for kindergarten. So the identifying numbers, recognizing which one would be larger between two sets of numbers within 20, adding within 10, and I would remind caregivers that this is very much conceptual. We're not doing like the numeral 2 plus the numeral 3. We're doing this all with either objects or fingers or pictures, things that we can get very hands-on with. Shapes are an easier one in my experience for children around this age to catch on to. The kindergartners that I worked with, this was definitely one of our higher areas. So there may be some preschoolers in this group who are already able to identify some of those attributes of the 2D and 3D shapes. And I would go over with the caregivers like what those words mean, because attribute is a very strange word. But there's things that go with that. So like the corners and the sides. And then lastly on here would be sorting items by different categories. So still very similar to what they were doing before, just slightly different. All right, so this slide is, in my opinion, one of the more important ones in this whole presentation. And a lot of these notes are going to also be on the handout that goes home with all of the caregivers who attend today. But this is just going over some quick ideas of ways that they can support math literacy at home, whether that be through playing board games together, especially ones that involve money or counting moves, or anything with problem solving in it, that they could work with their children to compare prices at stores or looking at things online. They can talk about bigger concepts like using a schedule or a calendar. So how many days until type questions could go along with that. At home, they could be having their children helping them in the kitchen with reading recipes, measuring ingredients, estimating time. And I would be sure to remind caregivers that we do have our culinary literacy program, and that includes a lot of kids cooking classes that would be very age appropriate for some of our friends in attendance today. Other ideas, giving children a chance to solve the problems before telling them how to solve it. This is something that I have noticed we, in general, as adults, don't do as much with children. They need to have that chance to think through how to solve a problem before we tell them what to do to fix it. And lastly, just talking about all the shapes and numbers that you see around the house or in books, and anywhere out in public, just so that we're seeing all the ways that math is around us everywhere that we go. All right, so on top of wanting to include more math literacy practices at home, I wanted to go over with caregivers different ways they can incorporate math literacy into the story times that they do at home. They may call them shared readings, but anytime that they're reading with their child, there are different things they could be doing to help support their math literacy development. So some things that can go into that are choosing books that happen to have a math theme, whether that be shapes, patterns, problem solving, money, And we will go over a list of some examples of different books that they could do, books they can use that have these skills and concepts in them. And there will even be a bunch of books set out on a table that have these math skills in them so that they can see the books, they can flip through them, and check them out and take them home today. So on top of how to pick out the books, we would go over ways that they can point out the math concepts in the book without making it feel very quizzy. So we would go over examples of how they can say, oh, look at these things that I notice. I see these things. Do you see more? Those types of questions will make it a little easier for the children and make it a lot less pressure on them while still engaging them academically. So some other math questions that they could be asking when they're reading are like, which character is the tallest? What would happen if we were to add one more to this group? And at the end, they could even ask, how many books did we read today? So to help continue the services that we can provide for our families and for their children, I would go over the different resources that we have specific to my library, including our online e-resources, the different programs that we have, and the non-traditional items that we have available through what we call our Library of Things, which include science and wellness kits, launch pads, Lego kits, and even some take-home story bundles. And I would make sure that I have information on hand for anyone who's attending if they want to take home a flyer about our different programs like the Culinary Literacy Center, our tutoring, and flyers for the different story times that we have, whether it be the family ones or the bilingual times. So this would be the last slide we would go over together before we would bring the children back with us. So just to give a quick overview for the parents, I would put up an example of 3 different books that they could be using at home in their readings that cover different math concepts. And I would make sure to tell the parents, look for the different numbers and shapes that are presented in the illustrations of the book that we are about to read together, and when they're reading books with their children at home, that I want them to listen for when we see numbers and problem solving opportunities in the story, both for what we're about to do together and at home. So after we finish this slide, I would signal for the attention of the other library staff with us so that we could bring the children back with their parents and do a story time together. So this is the song that we would do as part of our quick story time. Since we don't have a whole lot of time to do a full story time, we would only do one round of this song, but I would have the lyrics up for the parents just like I have here so that they could follow along with it. And I put at the bottom the type of tune we are singing this to so that they can hopefully be better able to follow along with us. So the book that we picked out for our story time today is called Look. I picked this book because I love the illustrations, and it doesn't necessarily look like a math book from the outside, but once you get inside, you can see that there's going to be a lot of questions about classification of things and looking at different patterns. So I thought that this would be a good way to show parents that there's books that don't really look math-ish, but can be used for different math things. After we do our story, we would do a quick finger play. Here's the one that we would do together because this one includes some counting and some simple subtraction by taking one away each time. And again, these lyrics would be up on the screen so that everyone could follow along with us. So to wrap things up, I would review with the caregivers the different things that we went over today and remind them to look at the books that are on the back table to peek through, see which ones they might want to take home, checking out from the library. So those books would include things like 100 Mighty Breathing Dragons, And we are shapes just a variety of different math and not fully math, but math-ish through STEM books that they might want to take home and read with their children.